Welcome back. There's no doubt that things look a little bit different than the way you saw this thing last time, so let's get started with this today. But first, I thought it might be real useful to give a little bit of background and kind of a little history on this guitar itself, and then we'll get back into the build. First of all, this is a Squier Bullet. It's a 1987. The history of the Bullet line in general was that they started around, I think, 81, 82, somewhere in there. The Bullet was always designed to be a Korean manufactured guitar. It just so happens that there were production issues that prevented Fender from producing it in Korea originally, and so they started out manufacturing them in the US, ultimately moved them to Japan, then Korea, and then several other places after that. But one of the interesting things about the guitars from this period of Fender is that Fender was not making instruments in the United States in 1987. They basically sold the company in 85, and the sale of the company didn't include the factory, and so the new owners had to set up a new factory, and it took a couple of years to get that up and fully into production. This is a time period when the Asian instruments that were coming out of Fender were really good because that's all they had. And so if you go look at like the mid-80s Japanese Stratocasters and Telecasters, they're like skyrocketing in price now because they're so good. And if you look at a guitar like this, it's so funny, like the Korean instruments that came after this guitar are much different than this one. I mean, you can tell this is a lower priced instrument for sure, but like the quality, the neck and the finish that's on the neck, the tuners that they used, a lot of aspects of this are much higher quality than even the guitars that came in like 89 or 90. So, I don't know, this is just kind of an interesting one, and the Bullet went through several transitions. The Bullets prior to this, a lot of them had a Telecaster style horn on the top, and of course they made a version that had a pick guard and some some different pot arrangements and more Strat style pickups than these. But this is sort of the evolution. It's got the 80s influence on it, so it's kind of the hard rock sort of version of the Bullet where it's got a humbucker and no pick guard and the black hardware and all that stuff. It's kind of interesting just to sort of see the 80s influence on it. But anyway, just sort of a cool piece, and thought I'd share a little bit of history about it. Oh, one other thing. The history of the Squire brand in general. The Squire brand used to be, back in like the 1800s even, I believe, a string manufacturer. And Fender bought the company, or at least the rights to the name at some point, and was selling strings under the Squire name. But Squire then became a brand name that they weren't using when they switched the branding of their strings to the Fender brand. And since they had this nameplate that they weren't using, and they had this problem of Asian manufacturers ripping off their designs and selling them for much cheaper prices, they decided, well, let's not completely try to beat them, let's also try to join them. I mean, they did the lawsuits and other things, but they also tried to join the Asian manufacturers and make a Squire brand. So they licensed out the Stratocaster and Telecaster and other shapes like this Bullet, and they ended up manufacturing them overseas. So they really were a competitor to Fender, but they were owned by Fender, so it was kind of a win-win for Fender. They could not fight their battles on the legal front and try to outcompete. So interesting history to the Squire brand in general. This guitar fits into that a little bit because it wasn't manufactured in the US for long before it was moved overseas, but it was definitely a lower price instrument made to compete with the cheaper guitars that were coming out of the Asian market. So something maybe you didn't know. Alright, so now back into the build. On the Bullet, I noticed that the frets have quite a bit of wear, particularly I would say halfway through the scale. There really isn't that much wear here on the tongue, and the fretboard itself actually has quite a bit of wear in it. It's actually grooved. I would say this guitar has been played a whole lot. I need to do a small fret job on this, but I need to make sure that I'm not taking off too much because these frets are just not very high. I don't know if there's been work done in this area before or if it's just that much play, but at any rate, it's probably the latter. But anyway, This is a 25.5 inch scale ruler that I've made, and I've cut my own grooves for where the frets go. And I've just been, for the past few minutes, sitting here playing with the truss rod, trying to get the neck as straight as I possibly can on the fretboard. The problem with that is that the fretboard is somewhat grooved, and I've just got to guess what the best point to use, reference point to use for straightness is. This isn't a bad point here, but it's got some weirdness to it. Like, it's a little bit loose in the middle, and it's also loose on the very end, and it's got maybe a little bit of a hump here in the area of the 15th to 17th fret. I can't really tell, honestly, and if I hold it down here, obviously it's loose up here at the top, but is that because of all the wear here? I don't know. But anyway, where I'm at is I've basically taken all the tension out of the truss rod, save for just maybe a 1/16th of a turn. So I basically have this thing loose, and I think that's where I'm going to put it, and I'm going to do a little bit of a fret level here, and we'll see where we are after that. I'm not sure I can save this neck, but I'm going to try. So you can buy a planing apparatus that's already got a radius built into it, you know, sort of a radius block that you mount sandpaper on, run it up and down the neck. That's probably the best tool that you can buy, especially if you get a long beam one that's long enough to go the entire width of the neck all at once, so you know the whole thing's just dead straight. I do very few fret jobs a year. I'm starting to do more, honestly, but I was looking for a solution that would allow me to do a fret job on the cheap and not have to buy a really expensive setup. What I've landed on is I've got this piece of oak that I bought at a home store. It was originally a really long piece of oak, but I've cut it, I don't know, 10 or 12 inches here, and it's dead flat. You know, oak tends not to warp, so that's why I bought oak, and it's a super hard wood. And I've got double-sided tape that I've mounted to both sides of it, and then I've got a piece of 280 sandpaper on one side and 500 on the other. And I've just been using this. So far I've used it on 2 or 3 fret jobs, and I haven't had to change the sandpaper yet. So I've got this tool that I can use, and then I think I've shown before that I've also got this diamond file that I've used occasionally for small fret jobs. So between the two of these things, I'm going to go ahead and plane these frets down, try to get them as low as I'm comfortable with, and level, and get these divots out. The first thing that you might do is mask the fretboard. I don't think that's necessary on this step, but I will do it when I'm crowning the frets. The first thing that I'll do is take a blue Sharpie and go over each fret and leave a line on the whole top surface of every fret, so that as I'm planing that fretboard, I can see where I've been and where I haven't been. And if I see, you know, that way you can see high spots and low spots too, because if you're going over a whole area with a long block like this, and you see like one fret that's blue and the other ones aren't, then you haven't gone far enough yet, because you haven't gotten down to the surface of that fret, and it's lower than the rest of them. So that's the idea. Let me go ahead and grab my Sharpie, and we'll get this thing marked up. Alright, so this has been drying for a little while now, and like I said, I'm just going to go over this until the divots go away and until I don't see the blue anymore. And I'm going to use the 280 side first, and then I'll switch to the 500 for a final pass. I'm also going to spend a little bit more time down here on the tongue than up here, because the wear is much more on the upper frets, and I need the lower frets to sort of match that height. Alright, so my camera cut off, but I've got one pass down with a 280. I've gone back and re-blued all of my frets with my Sharpie, and now I'm going to go over them with 500. Okay, so you'll notice, well, maybe you won't because my camera cut out, but you would notice that this pass was much quicker than the last pass, and that's because my frets were basically leveled from the 280. I just wanted to hit them with 500 to make sure. I have a couple of divots that are in these 6th and 7th and the 8th, no, 9th fret. So 6th, 7th, and 9th that are just a little too deep to get out. And they're not serious, so I'm going to see if I can crown them up enough with the crowning file to make them look okay. Hopefully that's good enough because there is not much fret left on some of these. Alright, well my last stage here is to tape off the entire fretboard because I'm going to do the crowning on the frets. So once again, I have marked my frets with the blue Sharpie. And I've got a fret file that I'm going to use. Now, a fret file is just a file that has a groove cut out of it, and that is supposed to make a nice rounded top to the files after I've just flattened them all out. So I've got to go over each one. Now, I'm probably going to start in a weird place here, but I'm going to start at some of the frets that I think are probably too low. If they don't crown up nicely, I know that I'm going to have problems with this neck, so I'm going to start here on the 11th. So as you start to crown, you'll see the blue start to come off the sides of the fret. And you want to keep going until you get all the blue off the top of the fret. Now you might stop when you just see a faint line of blue at the top of the fret. But you know, it just depends on what you want to accomplish. I usually stop when I can just barely see like a hair of a fine line of blue. Now I'm worried now that this is too low to crown, but I'm going to keep going. Well, try for a different direction. This is just barely, like, almost passable once I polish it, but it's got a tiny flat spot in the middle. I'll finish out the rest of this fret job. I mean, every other fret is the same way. You just need to go back and forth over them until you start to see the blue disappear. In this case, the blue is pretty much gone, but I think it's because I picked up a little piece of the masking tape and kind of ran it over the top accidentally with the file. These 6th and 7th are going to be my next biggest challenge. I'll go back over those and see if I can get those divots out. This neck is proving to be a little bit of a challenge, so I've got to consider a whole fret job, which I've never done before, but you know, there's always a time when that comes up, and this may be the time. Okay, well, I've done the best job that I can do with these frets. There's definitely some flat spots on top of a couple of them, and there really is just no solving that with the thinness of these frets. I just think it honestly needs a fret job, and I'm not going to do it. I'm going to put this guitar together and see what happens, and if it's playable, I'll sell it like that and just disclose the fact that it needs some additional work if somebody's going to truly play it long term. So as long as someone knows what they're getting into when they're buying it, then you know they can get a little bit of play out of it, and they buy it with full knowledge of what needs to be done. So hopefully it plays well. I put a straight edge across the neck, and it looks like it's going to work. So it's nice and slick. I've conditioned the fretboard quite a bit. It's still got a great feel to it. There's no sharp edges. It is what it is, as they say. So I've determined that the old bridge is not going to work on this body. And so one of the things I've been doing, I just put some pieces of masking tape here, and I've been using a ruler and a micrometer a little bit to find the center of the body. And really, I mean, if I had taken the old bridge mounting points and found the center of those and just the center of the neck mounting point and drawn a line, I would have come close to the center line. But I also measured the center of each of these holes on the body just to make sure the pickups would be centered. And I even ran the line all the way down to the strat button and figured out the strat button was a little bit off center, but that's okay. Then I placed my bridge and I just tried to roughly find the center, and I realized, well, you know, there's a better way to do that. And I ended up drawing two outer lines, like I measured the width of the bridge here. Then I might draw two outer lines. Basically, once I measured the width, I divided that by 2, measured that far away from each side of the center line, marked a line. Then drop the bridge over those 2 lines, and you can tell exactly when you're centered. Then the other thing I was doing is just playing with the bridge and the hole just to make sure that I had enough space for full travel of the tremolo as it went up and down. And oddly enough, or perhaps not so oddly, that ends up basically in the center, front to back of the original bridge holes, and roughly centered left to right from the original bridge holes. I wasn't sure that that was going to be the case because it had such a weird 2-pivot bridge on it, and I wasn't sure the 2 pivots were in exactly the same place on each side, and I wasn't sure they were exactly the same distance from the center line. The fact that the new bridge holes ended up in the middle, front to back, is just, I think, coincidence. But anyway, this is a Mexican bridge. It's got upgraded saddles and an upgraded bridge block, and I think this is going to make a good addition to this guitar. So this is going to be the next project, is drilling out those bridge holes. I'm skipping ahead several steps here, but what I've been up to, I obviously got the bridge mounting finished, and then I just sort of started to reassemble the guitar, and it's pretty much in a done state here, so let me just tell you what's been going on. I reinstalled the 2 single coil pickups, and I ended up finding a humbucker ring that fit a different humbucker. So this is a Fleor humbucker from Amazon, and a metal humbucking ring that I found that's flat and sort of matches the style of the other 2. It was a pretty simple install, except I did have to dowel and re-drill these holes on the outside corners. So since this humbucker ring was missing, and I was missing a couple screws up here anyway, I was able to reuse some of the screws that were on the old humbucker ring for these rings. Got everything all cleaned up, got it all back installed. I took an upgraded switch that I had laying around. This is a switch from, I believe, a Washburn guitar, and it's one of those Korean switches that's pretty nice, actually. It's a metal switch, not a plastic switch, and it doesn't have that weird new circuit board thing. It's an actual mechanical switch. So I got that installed, put the pots back in, wired it all up, got the new volume and tone knob, because remember, the tone knob was completely broken. Well, I had to get back in here to install a bridge wire, and I actually forgot about that piece. And the reason I knew it was when I plugged in the guitar, I got a little bit of hum. So got that thing wired in here now, but I just wanted to show off a little bit the switch that I talked about, which has the metal frame and the actual spring and the mechanical connections. It's a Korean switch, but it's a really nice one. The full-size pots were stock in this guitar, so I just left them. They're 250K pots, which is a little bit weird for a guitar with a humbucker, but that's what we got. Like I said, I put some new wiring in here, and there's some older wiring in here too, and it's not the prettiest job I've ever done, but it's functional, so that's all that really matters. The extra humbucker wire, I just left it on here in case somebody wants to reuse that humbucker for something. But anyway, I just wanted to show off a little bit. You can see that full-size block on the tremolo. It's got an extra wide claw on it. It's actually wider than the spacing of the springs holes on the block. But That's nice for stability, and nice wide tremolo cavity on it. Just overall pretty nice body. You can tell it's solid wood, no plywood in here, nice and light. I installed a new nut, slotted the nut. If you haven't seen me do that before, I've got a quick tip video on slotting a nut, and you can also look at maybe the Harmony Discovery video series and find that. Got strings back installed, got the neck relief set. I have a quick tip video on neck relief if you're interested in that. My fret job turned out to be awesome. I can literally set the action on this guitar at 40 thousandths and it doesn't fret out, which frankly, that's the lowest I've ever been able to get one, but I've got it set to about 60 thousandths on this side and about 50 thousandths on this side. Just a little bit under that. The new saddles are working out great. Reinstalled the jack plate. It's not perfect because there was a lot of damage around these holes on the old body, and I'd doweled them and re-drilled them and used new screws and a larger Switchcraft style jack, and new felts on the strap buttons. I gave the body kind of a quick polish, and I don't know if you can see it very well on the camera, but it's got this cool kind of faded and not faded look. So it's got like some wear look to it, where it's like got some brightness around the edges and stuff, and then it's got some natural wear here from where the guy that had this before me just played the crap out of it. So the plastics have some of that sort of honest wear on it too, which is kind of cool. And got the back plates reinstalled. I did end up having to shim the neck just a little bit. Maybe if you look at the Fender Teleacoustic project, you can see me shim a neck. I just dropped a little piece of steel up in here between these two upper screws, and it's just it's about the thickness of a heavy guitar pick or something, and that's allowed me to get the neck angle right to get the action that I want. Got new screws in the plates back here. The saddle screws do not protrude up from the saddles, so that's real comfortable when you're playing with your hand like that. So everything's in really good shape. I wasn't going to spend too much time on this one on camera just because I really wasn't sure I could save it, but honestly, it plays great now. I'm really excited about how it turned out. Thank you for following this project. If you like my channel, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys next time.